They needed a place with beauty of scenery, cool breezes, and ample room for the royal feet, which is to be given according to her mandate on the evening of August the 3rd. Not much time. The faithful envoys searched long and earnestly and rewarded on searching when the summit of our own Methodist Hill was found. And Methodist Hill was right next to her house. It was where the first two Methodist churches were built. Both of them burned. After the first one burned, they rebuilt in the same place. Interesting, yeah, this is her house right here, and there's the Methodist church, and you can see the steeple. The people who live behind this at the top of the hill now, where Locust Street dead ends, asked me last summer why that every time they dig up anything, they find bricks. And I said, well, probably because there were two brick churches built here, and they both burned, and there was a parsonage also. And then the Methodists moved down the street about a block and a half to the condominiums today, which most of you know. That was the third location of the Methodist, third permanent building location of the Methodists in town. And the interesting thing about that building, that's now the condominium, is that there were two houses there. And they did not tear the houses down, they moved them. They moved one across the street, which became Mr. Henry Babin's house, I remember it. And then the other one, and this is a surprise, if you know where, on Sycamore Street, the house that Leanna Hughes lived in for a while, that's kind of sandwiched in between two other houses, and it's kind of like, how did that ever happen? That was the other house. They just rolled it
Down the hill.
between the two houses that were already there. And that's how it came to be and be in such a strange location. Okay, so the gypsies are coming to Methodist Hill. They will return August the 3rd with their dark-eyed queen and a complete band of her subjects. The campfire will be lighted, tents will be stretched, horses will be traded, fortunes will be told, children will be stolen, and a band will be set at which the dusky maidens will preside. The queen, having heard of the exquisite music furnished by our own Laurel Silver Band, and we had lots of bands in town at that time, has issued a command that it be present. Vast multitudes are expected to come from all directions to participate in this feast of the gypsies. Signed, Gertrude. And then they came. August the 5th, 1887. Without doubt, the gypsy tea given by the ladies and gentlemen of the Methodist Episcopal Church, assisted by the lads and lassies, was the most successful entertainment ever given by them. The location on Methodist Hill was one that showed the advantage of the white tents, the wagons, the horses, and the dogs of the gypsies. The Queen, Miss Mamie Watson, had much honor paid to her, while her flashing eyes, raven hair, gay dresses, and the band presented one of the most attractive scenes imaginable. Refreshments were served by the gypsy maidens, bonfires lent a beauty to the scene and presented a handsome appearance to the passing steamboats. Can you see this?
Yeah.
But the gypsies are gone. The wagons, the horses, the dogs, the tents have vanished. And the stolen children have been returned. But the pleasant memories connected with it will linger forever. Now, the marriage of Miss Katie Breezes, remember we read about that last week with new furniture. The marriage of Miss Katie Breezes, a 17-year-old, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Frank Breezes, to Conrad Rumpf, formerly of Evansville, but now engaged in business in this place, occurred at the residence of the bride's parents at their new home, Point Prospect, last Wednesday evening. A large number of guests were present, including, and then she goes on to list some people whose names we know. I'm just going to skip to those. She says Ella Hulvershorn, who was daughter of the funeral director and cabinet maker in town. People from Evansville came. There were people from Boonville who came. The Kindermans, who owned a store on the square in Boonville. A lot of back and forth from Boonville too. Cousins of the bride came from Evansville, George and Willis Breezes. The ceremony took place in a large dining hall and was performed by Reverend Adolf Hulschlager from right across the street. He was the minister of the Evangelical and Reformed Church, which is Zion today. The petite bride was charming in blue silk and pure white flowers and was attended by the sister of the groom, her brother Charlie Breezes being the groom's best man. Refreshments were served by the host and hostess, and a pleasant social evening was enjoyed by all. And Mr. and Mrs. Rump will remain for the present with the father and mother of the bride. There was a lot of that also. Or they went to somebody in Louisville or some relative somewhere and would stay through the summer or whatever they decided. Okay, this is October of 1887. And they were having a series of burglaries in town, and they couldn't catch anybody. People were getting their houses broken into all the time, and they were just taking usually minimum stuff. This is October 21st, 1887, cool, dry, and dusty. A house situated near Love's old coal bank burned Tuesday evening. M.F. Raleigh, her husband, M.F. Raleigh returned from a successful trip to St. Louis and the South yesterday. He sold some furniture and brought back money. No arrests have been made yet, but the burglaries still continue. $55 was taken from the clothing of Mr. James Lewis Sunday while he slept.
Must have had a couple of those.
Now, if you were here a couple of weeks ago, well, actually, it was the first weekend in August. You know that the museum hosted their excursions and steamboat, showboats and steamboats with a gentleman from the Howard Steamboat Museum in Jeffersonville, and it was very, very interesting. He talked about the boats and how they operated and where they came from and what they did, and they brought those excursions. They brought them from Evansville, they brought them from Tell City on the weekends, and 400 or 500 young people, and sometimes they were well behaved and sometimes they weren't. But our favorite steamer was the Minnie, M-I-N-N-I-E. The Minnie belonged to William Norwood. William Norwood was a steamboat pilot. His house was on Water Street. Janet Bockelman's house is there today on the corner of Madison and Water Street. And it was a very, very modest home, but it did have a widow's walk around the top. And that was because his wife, Louisiana, would go up and watch for his boats to round the bend and come home. She could also see him way down the river on the other way, but remember it was all full of wharfs and warehouses and canning factories and so on, so it would not have been as easy to spot him coming from the other direction. But coming around the bend, she would have been able to see him. The steamer Minnie, belonging to William Norwood, burned to the water's edge on Monday. She had just received repair, new paint, and steam was being raised to convey her to Evansville, where she was to receive new chimneys. She was valued at $5,000 and was insured for $4,000 at Bennett and Odell's office. And Minnie was a favorite. But Minnie did not always run under her own steam. She was partnered with another boat called Blanche, and usually they ran together. A grand oyster supper will be given at Crescent Hall on Friday evening, October the 28th, 1887, by the WRC number 65 as a Thanksgiving Jubilee Supper. The GAR, Grand Army of the Republic Posts, and everyone else that appreciate the service of the veteran soldiers of the late war are invited to be present. Proceeds of the supper for the benefit of the destitute children of dead soldiers. Old clothing that can be made over for children will be gratefully received by the committee. Grandma Hickman, whose obituary notice appears here today in the journal, was brought here for burial Wednesday and was interred at the Casey graveyard. This is October 28th. A lady from the city was in town yesterday on a visit of pleasure and brought with her photographic equipment, which she proceeded to capture gems of scenery in our neighborhood. Today there are people all over town with cameras everywhere. Have you noticed that? But it was quite something then. Here's one of those weddings. Miss Gertie Hubbard is at present the guest of her sister, Mrs. William Walden, and at the same time is receiving the professional services of Dr. Walden on account of a painful felon. Followed by Miss Lou Ferguson was united in marriage last Sunday night to Mr. Thomas Miles at Jones Chapel in Kentucky. The newly married couple will remain this winter with Miss A.P. Williams. And always women traveled with someone, so it usually lists both people. Dr. Tracy of Henderson gave 8 temperance lectures in town, which were much enjoyed.
I'm sure.
Every Sunday night, they had a temperance lecture somewhere. And we were losing the game on that because, and I thought about this yesterday and I couldn't find it, but there was a place that said that downtown we have 8 saloons and 4 dry goods stores. And everybody always says that women spend more money, so you would think there'd be more dry goods stores, but in this case, we have all these saloons that men are going into because, of course, women wouldn't go. But they have all these, so we're obviously losing the battle here. You know, we are not a typical place. The moon's bright rays have caused the burglars to rest somewhat from their nightly visitations. But Sunday night, $5 was taken from the bureau dresser of George Hahn, and a night or two since a sack of flour was taken from Miss Fanny Fox. 2 deaths have occurred this week. A child of 3 years of Mr. Folsom, living at the north of town. Typhoid fever.
Wow.
Typhoid fever took lots and lots and lots of children. And there are stories here about families who lost 2 children in 1 week to typhoid. Older people also, but it seems like a lot of children died. This is Halloween, November the 4th, a report on how Halloween was celebrated. Halloween was celebrated at the residence of Mr. Johnson. Charlie Fowler carried off the honors in ducking for apples. Mr. C.B. McCormick, our resident, good. Our resident violin maker, his violin is somewhere, yes. He is engaged on his 50th, he's engaged on his 15th violin. It is a treat to have him point out the beauties of outline and polish with the tender touch of a mother that she gives her youngest child.
It could be sitting right here. We have the violin right here.
Yes. We were very lucky that the town was given 2 of Cornell McCormick's violins years and years ago by his relatives who came to town. Historic Newburgh had it made playable again because it hadn't been played in years and years. And the town hosted a little reception for the family, and then at the what was in the library, and we had Lisa Lance come from the Owensville Philharmonic. She's also a music teacher here in Maury County, just retired, and she played the violin that day for the family. And then HNI had the violin, and they used it at Ghost Walk. Lisa came and played it a couple of years at Ghost Walk for the people who were waiting upstairs at Preservation Hall. So it got some use, and then it just went back in the case and has been there for years since then. But it was appreciated very much. The whole thing was appreciated very much by his family. Wreckers have robbed the late lamented Minnie of all of her machinery, and the charred hull remains at the water's edge and may form the foundation for a sandbar in front of town. The young people are determined on being happy this winter. Those who like to dance have organized a dancing club. The opening dance, which will be given on Thanksgiving evening, and others caring to dance have banded themselves together under the name of the Happy Gleaners of '87. Amanda Fiscus, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Fiscus of Kentucky, eloped and was married to Mr. Frank Schreiber. She had been sent here to prevent her marriage from the gentleman. But love laughs at bolts and bars, and he followed her. with the above result. She doesn't gossip, remember that. Mrs. Goldlash has been collecting from the citizens to contribution for the families who so faithfully, through heat and cold, light and dark, ring the bell of St. John's Church 3 times a day. Mr. and Mrs. Stoll not only deserve a salary for the town's benefit, but the thanks for all for their punctuality. And remember, that's when the church would have been where the country store was.
Yeah.
Young ladies of the Methodist Church are preparing entertainment for Thanksgiving. And here on the back, Newburgh Nuggets. Clark Conway. This is Newburgh Nuggets, by the way, because she also wrote other columns. Clark Conway has returned from Wichita. A lot of people from Newburgh went to Wichita, went to Kansas. And sometimes she refers to it as the Newburgh community in Kansas. Because there was a lot of visiting back and forth and moving back and forth. And a lot of our people came to Newburgh from Vermont, which she mentions also a couple of times. Little Cecil Habib is very ill at present. Mr. and Mrs. Conrad Rumpf are in Boonville today.
That's the Newburgh.
That's a big deal. Yeah, that's news. The family of John Bristow moved up from Evansville Tuesday. And you dare not check into a hotel in Newburgh if you didn't want your name in the newspaper. She also listed the people who had signed in on the book at the local hotels, and there were several of them. So she had a lot of salesmen, usually, to keep track of. November 19th, 1887. Last Sunday was a beautiful day and carriages were seen in all directions. The congregation of Zion's Lutheran Church celebrated their mission feast. Many persons attended from Boonville and from your city. The number of clergymen were present, and among them were, and she lists a bunch of names, the Boonville Choir rendered valuable assistance, the closing hymn being highly spoken of. The collection was good and everybody was happy. Many of the visitors in town took advantage of the season to visit Keebler's Gardens, to visit their greenhouse, their garden, and they were well repaid for their trouble. For the roses and chrysanthemums are especial this year. The latter will soon be blooming, and one of the former has 5,000 little ones. 4,000 Irish junipers are growing well, and a large collection of tulips and hyacinth bulbs are coming to Mr. Keebler from Holland. His supply of water failing this summer, he lost all of his geraniums and will be obliged to lay in an entirely new stock. Now, this is a story my mother used to tell, that during World War I, they dug a tunnel between Zion Church, the German church, the Evangelical and Reformed Church, which sat where the parking lot is for Zion, across behind it, going down the hill. The church, the wood clapboard church was there. This was built in the 60s. And the town just tore down the old parsonage. It was behind the fire station. It had been moved from beside the church when they put the parking lot in and built a new parsonage. They sold the old parsonage and moved it down the hill. The buyer did. That's all beside the point. But where the old church was, on the next corner, the rumor was that they had dug a tunnel from the church to Keebler's Gardens to protect the minister and his German-speaking family. And that they hid some of their more valuable things in the tunnel because it wasn't safe. And their German-speaking, and anything that they did, their sermons, anything that they did, the church had to stop. And everybody had to speak English. So that's interesting. And then there's a story somewhere about a boat that ran aground on a sandbar with 500 people on board on a Sunday afternoon who all were headed upriver to party. And somehow they got them off the boat and brought them to Keebler's Gardens. And they enjoyed their chicken dinner that evening. Although they did not get to dance and have a good time on the boat, they had a good time in Newburgh and ate their chicken dinners. So everybody was happy. Always have church on Sunday at St. John's, the second Sunday, it's a month, that's the only day that they had a minister, a priest was there on the second Sunday. And Water Street, she says Water Street is so much improved, you will scarcely recognize it. The work of filling up the holes is still going on. I'm sure it's going on all the time.
Make way for the
All
motorcycle.
the time. Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of holes with them.
And any indication why Wichita and Newburgh had that relationship?
I don't know, there were some doctors who went there, who were
Okay.
from here,
Mhm.
and then people went there to visit all the time, it seemed like. It's hard to imagine, because you know, it was pretty much an all-day trip to go to Boonville and come
Yeah.
home. And so to
Yeah,
go
and
to
that many
Wichita,
years ago.
yeah, and they would have gone by train, I suppose, and maybe that wouldn't have been so bad, but it is absolutely fascinating to just pick this up, even though you may not know the people, and you may not know everything, but you can, well, here's Pep Miller and Breezes. This is, on Gray Street, Old Mill Apartments. Old Mill Apartments are where the Breezes Mill was, and it was still there when I was a kid growing up in that neighborhood. Pep Miller, we talk about the Ghost Walk. Pep Miller lived in the really cool house in the middle of the block of State Street on the east side of the middle house. Pep Miller and Breezes have finished their changes and repairs at their mill and now have a full roller mill, which will turn out flour and white as pure as any flour in southern Indiana. This mill was, until 1880, a brewery. At that time, it was changed to a flour mill, and the proprietors deeming it kinder and wiser to furnish the means for giving bread to the hungry than to manufacture that which frequently brings the wolf to the door. Yes, absolutely. You know, I could just open
These
it
are all things
anywhere.
that she wrote, correct, Ann?
What?
These are all things she wrote.
Yes, these are all things she wrote in the
has a
newspaper.
nice
She did
way
a
of
weekly,
writing.
she did a weekly column in the Evansville Journal, and, Page and Wilds have been receiving oats and potatoes, both Irish and sweet. The potatoes, Irish and sweet, yeah. That's from the Evansville Journal in 1887 also.
And how old was she when she died?
How old was she?
Yes,
Yeah, she was 78 when she died.
in 1929.
Yes.
I was just wondering, and it does mention her as belonging to a committee or a club, if she was a strong suffragette, because that was such a big deal at that decade.
Couldn't wait to
Perhaps
throw
she
her hat
was
in the
getting
ring.
too old.
Yeah, she couldn't wait to throw her hat in the ring, you know, to run for an office in Newburgh, when no woman had, maybe had tried, but hadn't been successful. I don't know that anybody else had tried, but she was certainly well-known and well-respected by everyone in town, apparently, except maybe some of the people whose names ended up in her columns. For checking into a hotel, I don't know.
She wrote about it.
But,
You know,
yeah,
Ann,
she-
these kind of columns were common in small towns, because I grew up in Hopstock and Fort Branch, and I remember even when my kids were little, that we had what they called the FBI, which was Fort Branch Information. And it was in the local paper, it came out weekly, and that's what it was. It was a gossip column.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, we saw little Robbie somebody in the store with mommy, and, you know, I mean, this is the
My
information.
mother used to write those
Yeah,
columns.
yeah, so
You
that was
have
kind of.
Facebook today.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So-and-so went to so-and-so's house for dinner.
At the Newburgh Library, in the Newburgh History Room, these 48 pages have this cover. And so this is what you're looking for if you go. Newburgh Nuggets by Gertrude. And that opens up just a treasure trove of information for you. Well, after the speech about the votes here, I gave the speaker, I'm sure he appreciated it. I gave the speaker a list of about 25 boats that actually docked in Newburgh all the time, that use Newburgh as a port. and picked up passengers as well as picking up cargoes. And there were excursion boats, there were show boats, there was a circus boat. My grandmother used to talk about the circus boat coming to town, and they would take the animals off and parade them around and try to sell tickets. And one day the elephant got loose and trampled through town, and they got it back, but she never gave us the end of the story. But she remembered when an elephant got loose in town, and I've never been able to verify that, but since it was my grandmother, I trust that it was the truth. One of the most popular boats that she talks about the most was called, no kidding, Frank Stein. I don't know if he was Frank Enstein or not, but his boat was Frank Stein, and it was a coastal packet boat. Edna Adams, Clyde, the Clyde was the one that got stuck on the Scuffletown sandbar. There were 300 people there. They were stuck there all day, but they had dinner at Keebler's. Somehow they got them off and took them to Keebler's, and I guess they were happy. The Emma Cooper, the William Porter, the Blanche, and the Minnie. Bless the Minnie's heart. The Buckeye State, which also belonged to the Norwood family. Frank Norwood was the pilot of it. There was a boat called the Charles Morgan. The City of Vicksburg came. The New Mary Houston came and took potatoes. There was a shipping boat. The Golden Rule was also a shipping boat. Two States, that was the name, was a coastal packet, and there were special excursion season rules for these boats also. And she talks about people from other towns coming to Newburgh and raising Cain and not being on their best behavior. We don't appreciate that here. We know that when our young folks go other places, they behave themselves. The John S. Hopkins, of course Hopkins was a big name in town, and it was a steamer. And then there was the Minnie, who was always with the Blanche. Rainbow was one of them. Silver Cloud, she wrote about. The T. Shriver. Kingsley was an excursion boat. Rainbow, I already said, that was their favorite packet boat here in town. Guiding Star, DeSoto, and Golden Crown were shipping boats, so waited at the wharf to be loaded. And then the Ohio. Joseph Snyder shipped 250 bushels of potatoes on the Ohio on her last trip, April 30th, 1888. Joseph Snyder's house is out just before you get to, you're past Outer Lincoln, and you're going, if you're gonna turn to go to Snooks or Wendy's or any of those things that are back in there, you turn just past Joseph Snyder's house. Some new entity has taken it over now, but it's the big two-story gray, historic, it has a historic marker,
Yeah,
and it's
in the book.
probably 2.5 miles, close to 2.5 miles out of town. So his farm would have been all that surrounding area, and he brought his potatoes down and
No, you're not.
sent them
Did they
south.
talk about the
You're not
cotton
that far.
blossom?
No, but I know about the cotton blossom.
Right, and we have a model of the cotton blossom.
I know, it sank right down here, not too far
So, I mean,
away.
that's kind of cool that we actually have a
Yeah.
model of it.
Yeah, we did. We also have the Majestic. You have a model of the Majestic in there. Everybody see on Facebook that the Majestic's in trouble. The Majestic is docked in a little town in Ohio right now. I thought it was still in Cincinnati, but it's not, and apparently hasn't been in a couple of years. But it's gotten crossways of politics in this little town and is gonna have to leave. For those of you who don't know, the Majestic was a steamboat that was pushed by a barge, by a tug, but it was a steamboat that in the 60s, IU Theater School operated it in the summer as a summer school project. And it docked in Newburgh at the foot of Monroe Street, right in front of where Randy and Penny live, twice a summer. And they did melodramas, they did musical things, they did one show on the way down, another show on the way back. Now, we used to hear, and I don't know if this was true or not, that it was 2 summer sessions. You know, the trip down was one session, and then other students got on the boat, and they did everything. You know, they sold the tickets, they cleaned, they did it all, plus acting in the shows. And man, was that cool, you know. As a little kid, I really didn't realize how cool that was. So I said to my sister, who's 4 years younger, I said, well, what do you remember about the Majestic? And she said, hands down, and it was the same thing I had said right here in this room. When they did the can and the whole boat rocked, and you thought the end is near. The end is nearer than it has ever been before. Because that boat would just thrash. The entire cast would be up on the stage with dancing. So I, you know, wouldn't that be great if Newburgh could bring the Majestic here to
Yeah.
permanently dock?
Boy.
With so many university theater programs here and our own theater group here that has had such a successful weekend, they're putting on their play again right now. That would bring people here. We're doing other things right now that won't necessarily bring people here because it's things other towns, other communities already have. But that would be something that would be completely unique
Yes.
and amazing. Now, do we have the money to do that? No, we don't. But it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to save it. I'm so afraid they're not gonna be able to save the Delta Queen, and
I know, that's.
it's stretched out too long.
Yeah.
But the Majestic is still in the water. It would have to be brought here and docked permanently, or taken somewhere and docked
A
permanently.
dry dock.
It doesn't run under its own speed.
They took it off there
What's the
because
political
it's-
problem?
Involving it right now.
What's the,
Political problem, you said it's.
In the town, in Ohio.
I don't know, somebody promised somebody something and it didn't happen, and
Okay.
we're gonna get to stay so many years, and now we want you to leave, and it was just,
Yeah,
you know. He said I could, no, I never said that kind of
yeah.
So,
thing. So, too bad.
You mentioned, I mentioned from the column on her death that she died of pulmonary poisoning.
Mhm.
I guess some people weren't surprised.
Some people what?
Were not surprised.
Some people were not surprised, probably the hobos and the tramps who had
Yeah.
tried to steal food from her and then it wasn't fit to eat. Yeah, some of them were probably surprised.
She was not a great cook. She was
No,
great love.
she was not a great cook, and of course she said she would put her pie on the windowsill because it wouldn't get stolen. She knew that. Nobody would take it. If you, I know we've got
Dan said that
one more question back here, but don't let me
Story was-
forget about pie.
they were divorced.
And that boat you're talking about, is it owned by somebody privately or
It's owned by an individual. The Majestic is owned
So-
by,
what would be your thought of, I mean, is somebody, are they looking for someplace to dock it?
yeah, I don't know if we would actually be a candidate for that with the Army Corps of Engineers and the dam.
Yeah.
But even if we did it down,
Mm.
further down, it, you know, it would,
Yeah, you'd have to build some type of
Some kind of
docking
a
system for it.
dock for it, you know,
Yeah.
which, hey, you know, it could happen.
Yeah.
Stranger things have happened.
Yeah.
Has anybody
So
looked
it
into
could
that?
certainly happen if somebody got excited about it
Has
and
anybody
wanted to
looked
do it.
into it?
Sorry,
Has anybody looked into it or inquired or?
no. I'd be the only one who was excited. Unless you guys are excited.
That'd be cool.
Yeah,
Be awesome.
Let's do
would
it.
be.
Let's
It
do
would
it.
That's
be.
right.
Go home and Google Majestic Showboat. Majestic was with IU for several years, and I don't know how many, but then it went to other communities and permanently docked at some other communities where they also used it as theater, but I think some communities used it in other ways. They didn't do the theater bit on it, but it's been around. It's been up the Mississippi in a couple of towns and
Would that be
and ended up in Cincinnati, and it's been in Cincinnati for years. Like I said, I didn't have any idea that it had left Cincinnati.
Wow.
I asked Rosemary Beckham, who isn't here today, but I want to thank her for putting up with all of my about this over the last 4 months. But she has supplied me with lots of things, plus the courage to go ahead and do it. And Randy for being my AV guy and also putting up with some,
It was okay.
and,
You've done some wonderful research, wow.
oh, I couldn't stop. Once I got started, I couldn't stop.
Isn't that fun?
It was just unbelievable. And, you know, this is one of her books. This also came from the history room at Newburgh. This is History of Newburgh, Indiana and Warwick County. And that's where the story about the Civil War units from here came. And she talks a lot about Boonville and a lot about the McCulloughs. But, you know, I've had local experts on Lincoln say that that they can't prove that he was ever actually in Boonville or borrowed books in Boonville. And I say, boo-hoo. Here it is. I
Why
mean,
would
Yeah.
you?
I never doubted it, you know, I mean, but if it's in your obituary,
Yeah.
that Lincoln went to your aunt's house in Boonville and used her husband, the judge, as library and borrowed books from him to study the law, and went to his courtroom, because it also says that, courtroom, as I told the kids in Boonville, when I would read to them about Lincoln, courtroom was in somebody's living room, usually, so it wasn't what we think about today, but it was, you know, he would go there, and also for them, I told him, you know, think about this, he lived at Holiday World, and he would walk, with no roads, no sidewalks, no streets, he would walk from Holiday World to Boonville. Think on that. And think about why we were known at Boonville Middle School as the Panthers. There were more Panthers out there than there were people.
Right.
Mhm.
So, in that